Hello, and welcome to What Is My Podcast About? I am your host, Peter Graves-Akeley. I am joined, as always, by Keith Ramsey.
Hey.
And unfortunately, Matthew Grace is still a bit busy with the rest of his life, so for today we have an extra special guest to fill his seat, and that is Thomas Sheehan.
You guys told me this was just like a 5-minute conversation. What's all this?
Hey, don't worry about it.
This is going to be like a 5-minute conversation that feels like a lot longer, but trust me, it'll only actually be 5 minutes.
I know it sounded like Peter was talking to an audience of some sort, but don't worry about it. This is how we just have these conversations normally. So it's like we're not using your voice like or anything.
Yeah, no, we're not releasing this to an audience. It's just I have some major delusions and can't participate in a normal conversation unless I convince myself I'm talking to an audience.
Exactly.
That's all that's going on there.
I think I remember driving you home a few times and you just started talking to people on the sidewalk. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think it actually went pretty well that time. Usually they attack me. I don't know why. What's going on in the world, Keith? I need you to keep me up to date on things.
So this is a bit of a weird one, and you were there for when I found out about this, but there's a movie coming out called The Lost City with Daniel Radcliffe.
Yeah, that one. I found out, similar, I was there when you found out about it, and I found out about it through the same way, but I have seen no marketing for this outside of on ads before YouTube videos. That's the only place I've seen any marketing for this fucking movie. Do you want to describe what Lost Cities is?
So from the trailer and what I've found about it, it looks like essentially Sandra Bullock is like a romance novelist, and there's an actor that plays the character from her book, which is played by Channing Tatum, and she writes this one called The Lost City, and Daniel Radcliffe is apparently the $1 million like bad guy of the movie who believes the book actually tells how to get to the real Lost City and kidnaps them. And for some reason, Brad Pitt is going to be playing a character in here as well.
Yeah, it's got some real Murder, She Wrote vibes in that it involves an author who's writing what she ostensibly believes to be fiction, but from the looks of it, might actually end up just coincidentally being true, and so she has to solve the mystery herself because she somehow tapped into it while writing fiction. Murder, She Wrote, that was a weird, deep cut for people who aren't familiar, but...
there was a Paul Blart movie. I think it was... sorry, not Paul Blart, but the actor. He did one like Diaries of an International Hitman, which like people read the book.
Kevin.
And then, thank you, Kevin.
James.
Kevin James.
James, yeah. So people read the book and then think that he's actually like this hitman and whatnot, but he's just some goofball.
Yes. Apparently, Murder, She Wrote is now a genre of movie that's just happening sometimes. So to clarify for people who aren't familiar with my deep cut of Murder, She Wrote, it's about a woman who lives in a small town in Canada who writes about murder fiction, and every time she writes a book, it ends up becoming an actual murder that she has to help the police solve because she wrote about it.
I think you mean she commits murders and then gets away with it every time.
I might have missed the last episode when that reveal happened, so sure, yeah, that's probably what happened. I might have missed every single episode of that series, to be honest.
I can't think of the movie at all. If anyone can think of it, then please shout out. Many years ago, there was a movie about this, like, basically Sandra Bullock-esque character in this new movie who writes about how she's this amazing adventurer that goes around the world and, like, helps out people in, like, foreign countries while, like, finding hidden treasure. And this little girl who's, like, on vacation or whatever with her parents, it gets, like, marooned somewhere and like contacts her, like doesn't call the police, like fucking like emails her and is like, oh, you have to come help me or whatever, and then like communications get cut off, so she gets roped into like trying to help find this girl in like somewhere Africa. Only thing is she's a total recluse. She wrote all this as fantasy because she like hates leaving the house, so it becomes like a comedy of like her bumbling around the jungle when she has like no clue how to interact with people or like go outside. But anyway, I got real vibes about that seeing the trailer. I just can't remember what the name of the movie is.
You
That's
see,
fair.
I think you would think that she would thrive in a jungle environment because, surprisingly, not many people in a jungle.
The thing I'm starting to realize is maybe it's not a new genre, and maybe it's just writers really like writing stories about how writers are secretly actually really great at solving all the world's problems. That might just be what's happening.
Yeah. The more we talk about it, the more I'm thinking that there's more and more of these stories. Because isn't that Secret Life of Walter Mitty? Wait, am I thinking of the right one? What's the
It's-
one? What's the one where she's writing about Will Ferrell, and Will Ferrell like hears it, and she's like leading up
Stranger
to
Than
how
Fiction.
Yeah.
yeah, Stranger Than Fiction.
Yes. Secret Life of Walter Mitty is just about a normal guy who starts traveling the world to try and find out what happened to his friend, I guess. I don't know. It's a super weird movie, and Buddy like took pictures. He's trying to find out his photographer friend because he works for a magazine, and Buddy took a very special picture.
Yeah,
Let's be serious. Everyone who writes has a god complex. It's just coming out.
Yes.
Fuck. Goddamn. It's a whole
It-
thing.
If they express within the first few pages as to how awesome and unique their character is, then generally they're describing the ultimate like reflection of themselves.
Yeah, and this guy doesn't even like the taste of beer because he gets sick after he has more than one. So that makes him the ultimate badass.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it always goes.
There was a great college humor video like many years ago about like Dragon Ball Z fan fiction, and like, oh no, like all the Z fighters are powerless against Frieza, and then oh no, like Brian Whittle's here. Oh, Brian, how did you show up? How'd you get so strong? I actually fused with Kami or Flo or whoever and Goku. It's like, what? How's that possible? Yeah, it turns out Brian's actually half Namekian, and that's why human acne creams have no effect on him.
It is just kind of how a lot of fan fiction goes. Well, I don't want to shit on fan fiction writers. Maybe that's not how modern fan fiction goes, but that's definitely how a lot of early fan fiction went. It was just people writing themselves into the story, and they're secretly the most powerful, and all of their flaws as an actual human being were justified by them being the most powerful character.
It's like whenever you say fan fiction, there's that immediate gut hesitation or gut reaction of, oh, it must be terrible, because everybody remembers the really, really terrible examples of fan fiction. But there are some good ones, some really great ones too.
Yep. That is certainly true. I can't think of a single example, but I'm sure there are.
So for Red versus Blue fans, they tagged on to a really popular fan fiction story. And Red versus Blue is pretty much Halo fan fiction anyway.
Yep.
But they grabbed hold of a series of stories about this one freelancer or whatever, which is all like fan fiction, and they really liked it. So if you go on the Red vs. Blue website, you'll see like a clear link, like, oh hey, and read all about the adventures of, I forget what it's called, but that's a good one. Sponsored by the creators. Warframe has some characters that were initially written in fan fiction that made its way into the game.
Oh god, it's like Matt never left.
All right, last time I'll mention it, I swear. But also, SCP is just the treasure trove of great writing.
That's fair. All right, to get us off the topic of this one movie trailer, The Witcher Season 2 dropped earlier this week.
No, that's why I saw the videos on YouTube about explaining the ending already.
Yep. Probably tell them the day it dropped because people are the fucking worst. I don't know. I have watched it. I'm not going to talk about it right now because it's all spoilers, anything I could say, but I will say that it was very good. And I'm looking forward to The Witcher Season 3. Also just makes me want to go back to playing the Witcher games. That is something it is very successful at doing to me.
Yeah, they really captured like just the feel of the world and the characters.
I
So,
mean,
yeah,
there's always a story coming out about Henry Cavill apparently just like correcting the writers and other people. I'm like, no, it's
Yes.
like this.
Apparently that was a big problem in the first season, and they didn't listen to him, and then they got a lot of backlash from the fans because a lot of people made complaints about the first season. And so apparently when they were making the second season, they're like, all right, Henry, so what's your input on this scene that we're shooting here? Like, it still wasn't just his vision of the series, but apparently he had a lot more input on the second season from what I was reading, which is super exciting. Also, just to get out, a lot of people are upset that some of the characters don't visually look like they do in the video games. But as we kind of discussed in previous topics, that's not such a big deal to me. As long as the character like fits the spirit and the personality of the character from the original story, I don't really care all that much if they physically look different from how they do in the fucking video games, or they don't quite fit the physical description given of the character. The visuals of a character are honestly the least important part of the story. It's still important, but it's not nearly at the top of importance for me.
And I do agree, and I know you guys have had this conversation already on a previous episode. I will say I did find it jarring how like 98% of the characters are like a spitting image of how they are in the games. And then there's that, like the one or two characters that are radically different. They're like, well, I mean, if everybody else is the same, why didn't they like try? Why did they go for like the exact opposite?
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, all I'm saying is I enjoyed it, and I quickly got over any of those complaints I might have had.
I do need you to confirm one thing for me though, because I haven't watched it yet. I'm planning to with like the extended holiday break period stuff going on.
Sure.
Do we get more songs from Dandelion?
We absolutely get more songs from Dandelion. It's great.
Are they bangers just like the first ones?
So we mostly get one song. Like there are a couple like short bits of songs. The one song we get in like its full length is a fucking bop. And one song he sings while in prison is also kind of a fucking bop. So
Great.
yeah, it's great. The other thing I will make reference to, not make reference to. The other thing I will confirm is they make direct reference to the stuffed unicorn that Yennefer owns and how it broke. And that's also a fun experience for everyone involved.
Nice.
Yeah. Anything else we want to talk about before we get into the meat and bones?
So apparently Matrix dropped today, or at the time of recording this podcast.
Yeah,
Yes.
Matrix came out and Hawkeye had its final.
Yeah, the finale of Hawkeye was today as well.
All right. Well,
Obviously, I
we'll have to
haven't
talk about
seen-
that another time.
Yeah, obviously haven't seen The Matrix yet, but I did manage to squeeze in a quick watch of the finale of Hawkeye before recording this. So yeah, we'll also talk about that at a later date. Mostly because I'm assuming you guys haven't had a chance to see the episode of Hawkeye that dropped today.
I have not.
I made someone promise that we would watch it together, and now I'm regretting that as I want to just watch it. So
Of course.
yeah.
Alrighty then. So for those of you who do not look ahead or read the titles of our podcast, because I know there's at least one of you out there who does that, the title, well, I don't care about the title, the topic for today's episode is Spider-Man No Way Home, the newest Spider-Man movie.
Oh my.
There's definitely a lot to unpack. I know this is going to be a long discussion on this. I went on to a rant actually with my girlfriend when we were leaving the movie, and she refused to listen to me because apparently I was talking nonsense. So we'll see how that goes when I bring it up.
I mean, there's going to be some nonsense getting thrown around here.
Oh, 100%.
I have also had a discussion about this movie already, and I'm looking to fucking get into the nonsense. Before we get into the nonsense, the one thing I like to do before we talk about it in depth, I just want your gut reaction. Did you enjoy the movie?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I'll
Yes.
go first.
Okay, cool. I just wanted us all to be out in front of it. We may end up saying things that don't make sense. We all just need to be very open about the fact that we all fucking enjoyed this movie. second thing that we have to do before we talk about anything at length. And we can't do right now because one of the things me and Keith like to do is make Matt give a 30-second rundown of the plot of any movie that we talk about. And Matt's not here, and Thomas, you're in his seat, so I'm going to need you to give us a 30-second rundown of the plot of No Way Home.
So, spoiler alert.
That's your entire 30 seconds. Just
the clock's already started.
All right, clock's started. All right, so after the events of the last Spider-Man, we pick up just a few seconds later. Peter Parker's life is in absolute shambles because his identity is revealed to the world. He's having a hard time getting into college, so his friends are also having a hard time because everybody is aware of who they are and who his accomplices are, so he can't get into university. So he calls up Doctor Strange to rewind time. Doctor Strange says no. So he says, well, can you make everyone forget everything? That sounds just as dangerous of a spell. And he's like, yeah, sure, that one I can do. So Strange goes ahead and tries to do a spell that keeps screwing things up. So the spell goes haywire. Next thing you know, everybody who, and here's the qualifier, everybody who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man is brought into this world from other multiverses, which means other movie franchises. So the villains, which, you know, of course, all the villains somehow learned that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. All the villains show up one by one in the world, and he has to go basically catch them and stop them from destroying everything so he can send them back. But after they realize that sending them back means that they're all going to die, because that's pretty much how they all went, except for one of them. Then he figures, well, I'm going to cure them all of their super villainness, I guess, and then send them back. So
to die.
A lot. I can't really get into it much more because at that point things just, go off the rails downwards.
That's an accurate description of the movie. Is all that happens and then things go off the rails downwards.
I do take one issue with the description you gave, though, and that's I'm positive Electro never found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man.
Everyone else I'm on board with, Electro absolutely never figured out he was Peter Parker. Peter Parker was Spider-Man.
Like, that's what I thought, too, unless it was mentioned in passing from Osborn when they were, in the office or something, and I didn't care enough to go watch that movie again.
So here's the thing. The movie itself also acknowledges that Electro doesn't know who Peter Parker is because when he pulls the mask off, he makes the joke about, oh, I thought you were going to be black.
Oh, you're right. Which, I'm glad they had that reference. I really wish that they would have had a live-action Miles Morales, make an appearance. But because of what the spell is, and referencing Peter Parker, it makes sense. Well, okay, there's no Miles Morales going to show up. We just get to make hints.
The other thing is, this movie was largely payoff to the first three Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, Sam Raimi Spider-Mans, however you want to refer to them, and then the two Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans. It was largely designed to pay off them. They took a villain from each of them. They took the Spider-Man from each of them. So I would have liked to have seen a live-action Miles Morales show up in this movie, but we haven't had a live-action Miles Morales before, and it would have been weird to pay off movies we've already seen and then throw in a character we've never seen before and just have people in the audience potentially get really confused about, wait, what's this guy from? I don't recognize him. Did I miss a Spider-Man movie?
Even just a low-key reference, like it showed multiple Peter Parkers through, had we seen, a little glimpse into all these different worlds and multiverses, in one of them, it's like a black guy swinging, maybe it'd be okay, that was Miles, and he got really close to going through the portal before it closed. Oh wow, I wonder if Miles made it through the portal. I wonder if he's in our world.
Yeah, and I guess to go on that too, this movie was kind of much the sequel for Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire. It was the Spider-Man 4 for that one. It was Amazing Spider-Man 3 and the third movie, and it was kind of the sequel for all of them. As for the Miles Morales thing, we already kind of got basis of him being in the MCU anyways, because the Prowler in the first Spider-Man movie mentions it.
Yeah, Donald Glover's character in the first Spider-Man Homecoming made reference to his nephew being on the streets, and his nephew is Miles Morales. So we know in theory, Miles Morales is in the MCU already. We just don't have him as a Spider-Man. And for all we know, in this version of events, he never becomes Spider-Man. And sorry to you, Miles. Maybe in a different universe, you get to be Spider-Man. But we do have confirmation that he is out there.
Yeah. And I could see him showing up at some point, especially how this movie ends and Peter being at the college age now. I think it's around that time we can expect to see a Miles Morales of some sort start popping up.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into some nitty gritty stuff, guys.
So we gotta take this slow. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm realizing now this is no longer a 5-minute conversation. So starting off, J. Jonah Jameson.
The one thing I'm kind of disappointed in, so we see that the Spider-Man in different universes look different to the point where Alfred Molina calls out the fact that Peter Parker isn't Peter Parker because he doesn't look like the Peter Parker that I know. The one thing I'm slightly disappointed by is that we never get a reference to Tobey Maguire being like, hey, your J. Jonah Jameson is just my J. Jonah Jameson. What's going on here? We make a comment, or we have him make a comment about how he saw on the news both Ned and MJ and saw that they were friends with Peter. We never get a reference to him having seen J. Jonah Jameson and just feeling rage boiling in the pit of his stomach at the sight of that fucking man.
You see, here's the thing, though, and this is kind of my issue with how they end up developing J. Jonah Jameson. The one in the Tobey Maguire universe is not a bad guy. He's a bit of an asshole, but the one from the MCU seems just like a flat-out bad guy.
Yeah. Well, based on who he's clearly inspired by,
yeah,
I think they didn't want to give him any redeeming qualities.
That's fair.
Yeah, they're dancing a fine line with the character they're parodying, so to make him to have any point in the movie where they get to be like, see, he was right all along, kind of validates a lot of people out there who don't need validation right now.
That's fair.
Unfortunate though it may be. But yeah,
yeah. There was so much in this movie, and any more focus on any more characters would have ruined it. So as much as I would have loved to see more JJ, as much as I would have loved to see Miles Morales, as much as I would have loved to see the sixth member of the Sinister Six, we only got 5.
Well, why are you talking about the Sinister Six? We got the Furious 5. That should be enough.
I mean, I do want to point out one thing. I want to point out one thing on this. I don't think this movie was ever intending it to be a Sinister Six movie. It was more of an homage and a send-off to those characters overall. I think they are planning to do a Sinister Six in-house at some point, but this movie was not it or intended to be it.
Yeah, so this one mostly felt like it was trying to right the wrongs of Spider-Man's past, because one of the big things about Spider-Man is he really doesn't fucking kill people. He absolutely has the power to. He has the strength to cave in the skull of everyone he comes in contact with if he so wills it. And so he's constantly pulling his punches anytime he's fighting a bad guy. And so I felt like a large portion of this movie, and the reason it brought in the villains it did, is because they were all villains who kind of died at the hands of Spider-Man, with the exception of, the one.
Well, actually, Sandman doesn't die. Lizard doesn't die.
Lizard dies.
Lizard does die.
No, Sandman's he saves him at the end, doesn't he?
No, he dies.
I'm positive he lives. He's still alive in universe.
He dies.
I know Sandman doesn't die. He was the one I was referencing when I said the one who doesn't die. I could have sworn Lizard dies at the end of the movie.
Sandman just leaves. I'm also kind of curious as to why he leaves when shit goes south when Goblin reveals himself in the apartment in the safe house, and all the villains scatter. It's why
you're right. Kirk Connors doesn't die. He gets locked up in prison.
Yep.
Locked up?
Yeah, he's arrested at the end of the movie.
Does he get friggin' impaled?
Gwen Stacy's father dies.
Oh, that's who I'm thinking of. You're right. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So yeah, the two of them don't die. So That one is slightly weird, them insisting on saving the lizard rather than just sending him back to get saved in his home timeline. But
I
that
think by
is,
saving, it's more so making them not evil.
yeah, so a large portion of this movie was dedicated to kind of righting those wrongs where Spider-Man has, unfortunately or not, killed a lot of people in the past, and this was trying to undo that and trying to show that Spider-Man, in addition to being the kind of person who could cave someone's skull in if he wanted to, has also, throughout the comic books, also been an incredibly gifted student, and so giving him the opportunity to, instead of using his physical force to kill the people who are bad, instead giving him the ability to fix what has gone wrong with these people's lives, I think was a large goal of what they were aiming for.
Yeah, they did it well. I don't think they really needed to go in and like, I mean, looking at it as like fixing the mistakes of the
Yeah,
others.
to clarify, I don't, when I say fixing the mistakes, I'm not trying to say that the movies were bad or there was something wrong with the movies. I mean fixing the in-universe mistakes that Spider-Man had made. Like the fact that he had inadvertently been involved in the deaths of these villains, not something that was wrong with the movie when it was made. They were all perfectly justified and made sense in universe or in the like logic of the movie. I just mean they're going back and fixing Spider-Man himself's mistakes and the fact that he was put into those positions where he ended up being potentially responsible for those guys' deaths.
Yeah, I think
So it was,
it's probably better to say that the characters were getting redemption for what their problems were in the movie and not necessarily the fact that it was the movie itself. So it's Dr.
that's a better way to
Octavius
phrase
getting
it, yes.
redemption for what happened to him, essentially. Well, the big one is obviously Andrew Garfield getting redemption for Gwen Stacy's death, right? Like, it's all the characters
Yes.
have something they're trying to get redemption for plot-wise, not by the fact of what the movie they were in was.
Yeah, that's a better way to phrase it. It's all of the different characters getting redemption. Another big one that I didn't notice until I thought back on it a little bit later, we also get a big moment of redemption for Tobey Maguire because we remember, if you remember from his fight with the Goblin the first time around, he dodges getting stabbed in the back, and in doing so, causes Goblin to die. And in this time, he prevents Goblin from dying, and in doing so, gets stabbed in the back. So it's a very nice little twisteroo in him potentially making a choice that he could have made the first time around. Because I don't think him taking that glider would have killed him the first time around, but not
see
taking
that
it
blade?
ensured the Goblin.
Yeah, that blade would have went clean through him.
The size of that thing would have gone through. Well, like it does go through Goblin and the wall behind Goblin. So
Yeah, but Spider-Man
would've killed
also has some pretty incredible healing powers as well. So I'm not saying he for sure would have been fine. I'm just saying I don't think it was a guaranteed death if he took that.
Yeah,
Glider.
maybe instead of doing his crazy flip, he could have just turned around and grabbed it.
Yep. Like he did in this one. Just catch the glider before it impales someone. But yeah, each of those characters get some form of redemption throughout the movie.
Now, this could be one of our first like differing opinions in the movie, but I felt the opening up until he gets the Doctor Strange portion of the movie was probably the weaker part, and it actually was kind of a drag for most of what we went through.
You mean up until he gets Doctor Strange to cast the spell for the first time?
Yeah, and I do understand that that stuff had to happen to set up the movie, but it felt like they did it in such a slow way that like it felt disconnected.
I don't. I wouldn't say I have as strong as feelings about this as you seem to have. Not that you have strong
So-
feelings, but I would say the pacing could probably be a little bit better in that early part. But I do think it was very important to
Oh,
establish
100%.
why Spider-Man was jumping to the point of casting a spell and making everyone forget. They had to show how alienated he was and how much it was impacting not only his life but the life of everyone around him.
And obviously, they had some things to distract us from how slow the pacing was. Because yes, I do agree. However, in this slow section, we also had our first big reveal of crossovers, which was Daredevil.
Yeah. The Daredevil scene is probably my like second or third favorite scene in the whole movie.
That
It's pretty
scene where
freaking
he
good.
catches the brick that was thrown through the window, and Spider-Man's like, "How did you do that?" And he's like, "I'm a really good lawyer." That gave me a bit of a fucking chuckle. I enjoyed that.
And it's because of that that I believe, should they continue this story in the future, when next we see Happy Hogan, he's going to have Matt as his lawyer because Matt says you're going to need a really good lawyer. And then 10 seconds later, he himself says, I'm a really good lawyer.
Yeah, and well, what the thing with Happy too, I feel like that's just them setting up Armor Wars as well.
Yeah.
Very, very likely.
But yes, the inclusion of Matt Murdock, the fact that they've now kind of officially started taking the Daredevil Netflix series into the fold. Like another thing we can say, fuck you, spoilers, this is happening. Spoilers for Hawkeye, not the final episode, the second last episode. Spoilers for the second last episode of Hawkeye. Vincent D'Onofrio has been brought back, so they are starting to bring characters into the fold from the Daredevil series, and I'm very enjoying of it.
Yeah.
I have opinions on Daredevil, which we will talk about at another time.
That's
on Hawkeye.
Yes.
I have opinions on both.
But yeah, so the one thing I will say about the Matt Murdock reveal is I just kind of wish there was slightly more of Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock. I understand this was less so about making him a character and more so just about having him be officially confirmed as in the MCU. Because all the theories about the hairy forearms people saw in the interrogation scene, and they're like, that's Charlie Cox's hairy forearms if I've ever seen them. He's in here. So I feel like him being in the movie was less so about him becoming a character and Daredevil becoming a character in the MCU, and more so just revealing that he is in the MCU and he'll get his own storylines in the future to properly establish him. Maybe acknowledge some or disacknowledge some of the stuff that happened in the Daredevil series. All I'm saying is I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of him.
Yeah, and this might actually
be how all the members of the Defenders went away during the blip. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I mean, this could be the new way we're looking at cameos in the MCU, where it might not be these big team-up cameos, but literally just, oh, of course, that character has this job or this skill set or this item, so they go to get whatever from the character.
Yeah, and honestly, that's probably the better way to do cameos, because we have so many characters in the MCU at this point that people are constantly going to be asking the question, why wasn't blank involved in this storyline? Like, fucking Hawkeye takes place in New York. Why isn't Peter Parker getting involved in Hawkeye? Is a question people might theoretically be asking. Not that I'm trying to ask that right now. So getting rid of the idea of big team-ups as being the cameo, and more so just having a character show up for a scene and provide a useful tool or bit of information might be the better way to do cameos going forward.
Yeah, and I hope this is the case, because that means in the future, without making a big deal about it, we're going to possibly get a She-Hulk versus Daredevil, like, in the courtroom.
That would
of having these two lawyers go at it on screen.
A 6-episode crime drama that's all in the courtroom.
Oh, Law and Order MCU, and it's just Matt Murdock versus She-Hulk for the entire fucking series.
I'd watch it.
Oh,
I would absolutely watch it.
Absolutely. Oh.
So yeah,
I mean, maybe there's gonna be another allude to it, like when the She-Hulk show comes out. Maybe like Miss Page, Karen is gonna show up, or Foggy is gonna be like in it in some way. I guess lawyers.
Yeah,
I think there is a good chance we'll be getting the Daredevil characters. I am curious to see what other things get pulled over.
Yeah, from what I can tell, because a lot of people were really happy with the casting when they watched that movie, or not that movie, the original Daredevil series, I think it's a lot more likely we'll get the cast brought over, but the plot not so much, because I think there are certain things that happen in the plot that they just don't want to deal with having also happened in the world.
Like Dragon Bones under New York.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be one of those loose reboot things where it's like they'll make mention of things, but what's canon and not is very vague.
Yeah. Daredevil will talk about how... Hey. Yeah, he'll have a line about how he dealt with the Hand in New York without talking about what specifically his interactions with the Hand were.
Mm-hmm.
That way, if people want to have an idea of what he's talking about, they can watch the Daredevil series, and maybe that's what happened, maybe it's not, who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, so looking forward to all of that. And then as mentioned, looking forward to some of these characters showing up and helping each other. Like in Hawkeye, why doesn't Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or anyone else show up to help out? Even after it, even after Hawkeye drops that massive building-sized arrow onto the bridge, it's like that's gonna make the news. That's gonna tell like everybody, all the Avengers or remaining heroes who's where. So
Yeah, so that's always been a problem with the MCU is they can't afford to put every actor into every movie. And so people on the internet are always like, why wasn't blank involved in the events that happened at blank? Or why didn't he call on his good friend blank? Uh, I think we're all just going to collectively have to learn to move on from that. And hopefully cameos can be a thing and a way of keeping the world interconnected without having to constantly bring every single one of the Avengers into every conflict one of the Avengers gets into.
That's fair.
Um,
So I do have an interesting question for you guys, and that's a lot of people have been very mixed on the fact that Doctor Strange cast this spell, saying it was out of character or weird and such and such. How do you guys feel about him doing this?
I think there was a very subtle detail at the end of the episode, or not episode, end of the movie that revealed why he cast the spell. Well, I think there's a couple reasons, because we already know how much Doctor Strange has been invested with trying to change the past, and he's realized that that's not always something that he can do. So he kind of understands where Peter Parker is coming from. And I think the very subtle detail that kind of gives away the gambit of why he was willing to cast a spell that might seem out of character for him. The very end of the movie, when, spoiler alert, the universes are cracking open and all the multiverse, everyone who knows who Peter Parker is, which is infinitely many people because we have infinitely many universes, starts coming through the floodgates. And Peter says, make everyone forget who Peter Parker is. That would fix it. And Doctor Strange has the line of, if we do that, then everyone who loves you, we would all forget you. The fact that he uses we and not they there, implying that he also cares very deeply for Peter Parker, because they've been through some shit together, and the entire time he had to remember this was just a child who was willing to fight a fucking alien who had the capacity to kill entire civilizations. So I think it's safe to say Doctor Strange clearly loves Peter Parker, not in like a romantic way, but in like a paternal way. And I think that's why he was willing to do something that other people might be arguing is out of character for him.
Yeah, definitely with the original trailer, it seemed like it was an out of character thing, because we got the misdirect of Wong saying don't cast that spell. But when we actually get into the scene with them talking about the spell, it sounds like Doctor Strange just kind of casts this whenever, and it's not a difficult spell. It was Peter fucking up the spell that caused the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that legitimately made me laugh in the theater was Wong trying to be like, that's a very serious spell. He's like, we've cast it for less. Like, remember the full moon party at Camartage? And Wong's like, no. And Doctor Strange is like, exactly. That legitimately had me laughing in the theater when I fucking saw that.
Or that Wong is the Sorcerer Supreme because Doctor Strange was blipped.
Yeah, technicalities due to Doctor Strange being blipped. Fucking great. Which is one thing I will say about this movie that it did very fucking well, was it had a very solid balance between what was humorous and what was emotional, to the point where there were multiple times in this movie where I was tearing up, and yet interweaved between those times when I was tearing up, there were moments when I was laughing about what was happening and then going right back down to the pits of sadness. So it didn't feel jarring when any of this was happening either. So it did a very good job of constructing a story that made me feel a lot of things while I was watching the movie. That's how I'm going to phrase that sentence.
I know what you're talking about there. Like the obviously we had an incredibly sad death, one I didn't see coming at all. I don't know if
as soon as she fucking said with great power, I was like, she's dead. She's not getting out of that room.
The moment she started to say, you have great power, I was like, oh, she's going to die. Because anytime anyone tells Peter Parker that with great power comes great responsibility, they're saying that before they fucking die. Usually it's Uncle Ben saying it before he dies, but sometimes it's Aunt May, sometimes it's other people.
Yeah.
And
And so
the moment she
like,
started saying that line, I was like, she's dying.
yeah. So I wasn't expecting that. Like her death, Aunt May's death was like very sad, very tragic, and yeah, like because you didn't see it coming, or I assume most people didn't see it coming, it hit really hard, and then we
I will
go
say
right
I
from
did
that.
not walk into that theater expecting Aunt May to die. It wasn't
Yeah,
until we got to that scene that I started to realize what was happening.
yeah, and then we go right from that into like his friends goofing around and like, hey, we're joking about the other two Spider-Man. It's all a big wow factor. And then we go right back to like Spider-Man in the depths of despair, like, just talking about how he wants to kill him and rip him apart. Like, okay,
Yeah.
right. There's a lot of emotions. A lot of
Yeah,
emotions.
you get the feeling that. So, to go back a little bit and explain some of the plot, in case someone is, for whatever fucking reason, listening to this podcast without having watched the movie.
Monsters.
Yeah. So they cast the spell. These 5 villains come through the Wayworks and end up in our dimension, well, the MCU. And they wreak havoc, and Spider-Man sets to collect them all so that they can send them back to their own dimension and cancel out the spell. And after collecting them, he realizes that each and every one of them was just about to die in their own universe, except for Sandman and the Lizard. But I guess most people, he wouldn't realize that. Everyone else seemed to believe that they were about to die.
So there is some debate on this, because what I've seen a lot of is people taking it that they all were pulled from the universe at the moment they found out Peter Parker was Spider-Man, and not before their death. So yeah, Octavius would have been in that situation where he's probably sacrificed himself once he goes back, which I guess kind of explains his heel turn in that movie, in a way. But for Osborn, he found out at that Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah. Regardless, we know all of them kind of are under the understanding that if they go back, they're going back to their death. Which is why Peter decides he has to try and help save them, because he doesn't want them to just be sent back to the slaughter. And that's what
That's
kind
so
of
brutal when they're just going back to fight another Spider-Man.
I
When
mean,
you go back to the hellish future that is your own dimension against a foe that you can possibly beat. Isn't it just you?
Yep. But regardless, so he comes to the conclusion that he has to help save them. And after Aunt May dies, and he has the moment of self-pity where he's explaining how this isn't his responsibility. Dr. Strange was right the first time. They just have to cancel out the spell and send them all back to be resolved in their own universes. I kind of got the vibe in the theater. Like, yes, it's largely him being sad and being exhausted and feeling like Aunt May's death was because he tried to do all this. But I also kind of got the feeling that he was fully willing to send them back on the understanding that they were going to die, because that's just what he wanted to do. He wanted them to be dead at that point, as we see later on, where he absolutely wants Norman Osborn to be dead.
Mm-hmm.
I guess. That fucking fight scene, man, between him and the 2 fight scenes between him and Osborn were both fucking amazing fight scenes.
Well, the building fight between him and Osborn is my second favorite scene in the whole movie.
The fight where Osborn tackles him down through multiple floors.
Yeah.
That was
And
fucking hype.
the beautiful thing about that is that's probably like the most gritty, raw fight that Tom Holland Spider-Man has been in this whole franchise. And normally he tries to talk down people. It's like, oh no, don't do this. Like all of his characters, villains, he's tried to talk down so far. But he actually came face to face with a killer who was just crazy and wanted to kill, and he did not know what to do.
Yeah.
So
and
that was really great. Like when the fight first started, everything was super chaotic, but that was because you had 6 characters moving in different directions. Like so there was a lot of cuts. It was messy at the very start, but then it became really freaking cool when they're like in the hallway and going through like multiple floors.
Yeah.
The part in that fight where Spider-Man kind of this is a bad word for me to use, but I can't think of a better one while I'm vamping right now. But Spider-Man kind of mounts Willem Dafoe's shoulders and just starts laying into him, just punching him repeatedly in the face, and Willem Dafoe is just fucking laughing it off.
Yeah.
Oh, that scene was so fucking good.
It's just a highlight that at the time William Dafoe was just the perfect casting for Osborn.
Yeah.
Yes. And
I
I
saw
heard that I don't know how true this is, but supposedly he agreed to do this movie with the understanding that like he would do all of his own stunts and fight scenes, and he's 66 years old.
Yeah.
I have my own personal fan theory about the movie, which is that each and every one of the actors who played one of the 5 villains was told they get to continue making movies in the MCU so long as they actually physically beat the shit out of Tom Holland. And so they were all giving it their all in each of those fight scenes. Who knows how true that was, because I think Willem Dafoe was the only one who actually was in a position to punch Peter in the face. The rest of them all kind of had CGI going on, but
It's true.
maybe that's why Willem Dafoe really went to town on fucking Tom Holland there.
I really like the costume design, and this is something I want to talk about. Is like, I think they did a great job with the costumes and making them all look the way they did. However, holy costume change, Spider-Man. He changes his costume a fucking lot, and
He does, but the thing I like about it is it's not him making new super suits each time. It all kind of makes sense. So the first costume we see him wearing is the nano suit, and then a chunk of the nanobots get ripped out, so he can't wear that suit anymore. So he brings up his other one, but that one had green paint thrown all over it, so he can't exactly. I mean, he could, but he'd look really stupid wearing a suit with the big splotch of green paint over it. So he's wearing that suit inside out for his fight with Electro, and that's why that looks like a whole new suit. It's the suit we've already seen with the wiring on the inside, except now the wiring's all on the outside. And then he ends up going and visiting May, and she cleans the suit for him, so from that point onwards, he's wearing that suit the right way. And then the final costume change is when he gets some of the nanobots back, and they kind of like enhance the spider emblem on his fucking suit. So it wasn't like he was constantly making new suits throughout the movie. It was all justified in universe of why he had all these different suits that he was wearing, and it's probably mostly just going to sell a whole bunch of Spider-Man toys.
like, yeah, but I thought it was just unnecessary how many times the costume changed. And yes, you're right, it does make sense, it does work, but had it not been for what the final costume was, I would have been like, just like, oh my god, like, come on.
That's true.
Like,
There
stop
is
wasting
one
time.
final uniform we get to see him wear for only half a second. I guess it's a couple seconds.
The shiny blue spandex.
Shiny blue
the
spandex.
original comics Spider-Man costume.
Yep.
Had it been anything else, I would have been like bothered. But like this was good.
Oh yeah, well, this is effectively the 3-movie trilogy we had is the origin story for Spider-Man as a whole, and him being forgotten is kind of a soft reboot that gives us the actual Spider-Man of the comics.
Yeah, so I think the whole trilogy as a whole is a lot of his growth as a character, because the first movie is him trying to impress Tony Stark, essentially. That's what the whole first movie is about, is him trying to impress Tony Stark, prove that he's capable of being a full-on superhero in his own right. And then we get Far From Home, and it's him trying to live up to Tony's shadow and trying to be the superhero that Tony was, and feeling like he's not quite cut out for it. And then this movie, I feel like this movie was largely about him learning lessons from Aunt May and learning that perhaps Tony Stark, while a true hero and a great benevolent god of the MCU, according to that one guy in the post-credit scene, isn't perhaps the person he should be modeling his life off after. And I think this is the one where we finally see him kind of being his own hero, because a key detail that I saw someone pointing out on the internet is in the first 2 movies and in any of the Avengers movies, when we see him fighting someone, he's talking throughout them, and a lot of the time he's apologizing for the fight that he's having and saying like, sorry, I kind of have to do this. This is the one where when we see him fighting, he's never apologizing for what he's doing. He's fully... Because the apologizing always kind of felt like he was shifting the blame off of him and not taking responsibility. I'm sorry for the fact that I'm fighting you. It's not my desire to be fighting you. I'm fighting you because I have to fight you. These are the ones where he's fully taking responsibility for the fights himself. And it was a very big sign of character growth that he's no longer apologizing for the fight and trying to shift blame off of himself. He's fully acknowledging that this is just what he has to do to be the kind of hero he wants to be.
Well, also the movie kind of starts with him having all of his like support networks for superheroing stripped away, where he loses access to all of the Stark stuff, pretty much except for the suit he has. Stark Industries is under investigation, so they can't really help out. He loses his house.
Yep.
The media support.
He loses Aunt May.
So yeah, and ultimately he does lose everything at the end.
He even loses Strange, like his only ally who he has to fight.
I think you mean Steven. Or Sir, depending on his current mood.
I think it's depending on his current opinion of you.
Yeah, that scene was fucking great, where, throughout the beginning, Tom Holland keeps referring to Stephen Strange as Sir. And he's like, we've fought Thanos together. Don't call me Sir. He's like, okay, Stephen. And he's just like, oh, that feels super fucking weird. And then after Tom Holland fucks up the spell repeatedly, he's like, Stephen, I'm sorry. And he's like, call me Sir. That was like so.
Well, it wasn't just the fucking up the spell. It was also the fact that he got denied from college, and his immediate reaction was, "I'm going to cast a spell to get everyone to forget," and not, "I should talk and make my case."
Yeah. To be fair, it's another classic example of Spider-Man is just a fucking kid, man. He's just like doing the best he can, and he's a superhero who has fought against some amazing odds, but he's still a high school student who does not understand how the world works.
Yeah.
Yeah, being played by a 30-year-old.
Is Tom Holland 30?
No, Tom Holland's like 25.
I'm just
I didn't think
putting
Tom
out
Holland
a
was
number
older than me.
because he's clearly not a high school student. But yes, like really all of them were a bit, too old to be high school students.
Tom Holland is 25.
Yep. Andrew Garfield is 38, and Tobey Maguire, being the oldest Spider-Man, is 46.
Yes. Jesus.
So I like how, okay, I'm gonna take all this with a grain of salt. So I like how they had that bit about how Tobey Maguire has back problems.
Yep.
Yes.
But that whole bit and a lot of bits in and around that scene, they're cute and fun for a first watch, and I was really enjoying myself. However, I don't think this movie is going to be super rewatchable, because that and a lot of lines in this movie are really just put in there to be like cute little, oh, hey, remember that scene? Or, hey, do you guys recognize this reference?
Yeah.
So
honestly, a lot of the movie to me felt like they were tongue-in-cheek references to the internet itself, and a lot of the memes that exist as a result of the Spider-Man movies. Like the fact that Tobey Maguire is complaining about his back, I felt like that was largely based on that one scene where he fucking falls off the roof and breaks his fucking back, and stands there, he's like, my back!
It's also a joke to the fact that Tobey Maguire himself actually did injure his back during Seabiscuit, and he tried to use it as a negotiation tool for the next Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, he couldn't do his stunts in Spider-Man 3. They had the stuntman, or he wore his mask a lot more than they intended. So yeah, that was a thing going forward. Is like, oh hey, remember that? Or
I am something of a scientist myself.
It was cheesy, but I love the shit of it, because it wasn't just a, hey, he said the line. It actually fit contextually too.
Oh, it did. It worked. But in 5 years' time, well, even now, I think that meme's already run its course. So yeah, when I watch this again in 5 years, or if I'm showing my kids, oh hey, check out the Spider-Man movies from my generation, they're gonna be like, I don't get any of these lines. Why are they talking so much? Because yeah, they do have a lot of talks and conversations. Even they talked a bit too long during the when the big fight is happening on the Statue of Liberty and the sand's flying everywhere and there's villains climbing up after them and they're all like arguing over who's Peter One and who's whatever. It's like this is not the time for that.
But that's a very that's a very Spider-Man situation, though. I feel like in a comic, Spider-Man would have the same conversation.
It is a very Spider-Man conversation, but it is the whole "What's an Avenger? Are you a part of a band?" That whole exchange. I felt like it did shift the tone of the scene a fair bit, and it's one of those things where it's a reference that was put in there honestly for no one, because anyone who's watching these movies is a fan of these movies and doesn't need to have the concept of Avenger explained to them. It's really there for like anyone who doesn't realize that these Spider-Man movies were standalone movies and wasn't aware of the fact that the Avengers didn't exist in the original Spider-Man movies because they predated the MCU. So it's just a weird choice for them to make a big exchange about. Because it's one of those things 5 years from now, going back to watch it like Thomas has been saying, it's just going to feel awkward and out of place.
Yeah, and so this is one of those movies that needs a rewatch to get a critical examination of it. I only saw it the once, but yeah, I feel that in a lot of scenes like were great on the first watch. Because yeah, it was amazing seeing them all on screen and like hearing them all like talk to each other like this. But after the wanderlust and the honeymoon phase wears off, I think you can critically analyze this movie a lot more. Because yeah, that really threw apart the whole pacing of what was going on at that moment. And even if it was a Spider-Man thing to do, in the comics, they could have had just panels and it would have made a lot more sense on like, oh, we don't know how much time has passed. We're just gonna keep going with this. Like,
that's
yeah,
right.
they can like spend a panel talking in full sentences while like swinging and then just continue on.
That's fair. And I feel like you have highlighted a problem that's definitely going to be with this movie, where a lot of it is very contrived in a few senses. And I'm not, again, I love the movie and I still will enjoy it watching it multiple years down the line. But I feel like a lot of the things that what they were doing with this movie kind of stripped it from being anything more than what it is at face value. And in that, it kind of makes it not even the best of the Spider-Man trilogy so far we have.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie, but I definitely feel like it. Like another scene that I feel like was like this. I think it was fantastic on first watching. I feel like going back and rewatching the scene probably drags on a bit too much, and that's the scene where Ned and MJ find the two other Peters. I feel like that whole interaction with Andrew Garfield, where he's trying to prove that he's Spider-Man, and the whole conversation with the Nona about, oh, you have to get the cobwebs out of the corner. Like, yeah, it's a nice touch having Spider-Man clean up webs. Cool scene. I feel like on future rewatchings of that movie, that scene probably drags on a bit too much.
Yeah, and I thought like because there was a lot of information coming at you hard and fast, and like it's as we talked about, it's in between two super emotional bits, and yet like yeah, it's drawn on too long. Part of which is because they have his Nona. Am I saying that right? Was it Nona?
Yeah.
Yeah. His Nona shouldn't have been in the movie. Like, yeah, it was cute and kind of funny. It still took away from it all. Like, have these characters actually talk, get through the scene.
Honestly, the fact that that scene, a large portion of it was his Nona saying something, and then Ned having to translate for everyone else. I feel like if you cut the Nona out of it and just have Ned say what his Nona was saying without him pretending to be translating for someone else and just him sharing the opinions himself, I feel like it would have worked just as fine and wouldn't have felt like it dragged nearly as much.
Yeah, because I bet, I didn't time it, but I bet if you went in, cut all the scenes with Nona in it or talking or like it on her, you would save like 5 minutes of the movie in a critical part and you would not miss a beat. Like you wouldn't have like taken anything substantial at all away from the movie.
Yeah, you would still have the levity of the scene to kind of give people a breather before they go into the next emotionally heavy scene where everyone's explaining how MJ dying was a good thing because it taught him the lesson. And still have that scene to give people a chance to catch their breath before they have to go into it. I don't know.
I will say though, I really love the whole thing of MJ throwing bread rolls at him to
Yes,
try to see if he
MJ
had
throwing
this
bread
tingle.
I have the
That was
tingle. It
cute.
doesn't work for bread.
and the two of them like immediately seeing each other and like shooting at each other, like the web shots as they like flip around. It was neat.
Oh yeah, well it's because even in the comics they have the precedence of if two Spider-Men get together, they get like weird feedback.
Yeah, because the Spidey sense like plays off of each other, because one of them registers any movement from the other one and like prepares to take defense against it, and the other one registers them preparing to take defense as them getting ready to offense, and it creates a feedback loop where it constantly accelerates between the two of them.
Yeah, and then of course Tobey Maguire, like Tom Holland immediately like whips around when the two of them are up on the building for no reason. That the two of them are just like perched on the top.
Speaking of Spidey sense, I want to go back to an earlier scene that I thought was very amusing to me, which was the first time Spidey steals the box that would destroy the spell and send everyone back to their own dimension. And Doctor Strange does the technique where he knocks Spidey into like the astral plane where he's disconnected from his physical body, just so he can easily take the box back and be done with it. But Spidey's reflexes are so well tuned that even when he's not in his body is still protecting the box to the point where Doctor Strange can't grab it. I thought that was another great fucking moment to happen.
Oh yeah, there's been a few times in the comics where Spider-Man's been knocked unconscious, but his Spidey sense, since it's a reflex, still keeps him safe.
Yeah.
That was cute. I did like it, but at the same time, man, Strange like didn't try at all. He just like lazily moved like one hand, like missed, missed, missed. Now he's back in the body.
Something
Well,
to point
out. Part of that. Sorry, go ahead, Keith.
I was gonna say something to point out during this scene too, and it is kind of easy to miss. But astral form Peter has like the little wavy lines to indicate like the spider sense when he's in the astral form.
Yeah, and he has the line about my Spidey sense is going nuts right now. The other key detail to notice is while Spidey's knocked out of his body, time is slowed the fuck down. Like you see people standing still on the streets where they were walking. Spidey's whole body is still getting knocked back and falling into the street while this is all happening. So I think the reason Doctor Strange doesn't seem to be putting in a lot of effort is because he's putting a lot of effort into keeping Spidey out of his fucking body for those few moments. But I don't know for sure. Maybe that's not a thing.
It just looked kind of lazy to me.
Fair.
I called it in the theater after we got out. Peter can attest to this. I am saying that the most memeable moment from this movie is going to be when Peter beats Doctor Strange in the mirror world. And
you know what's better than magic? Blank.
Yes, like that. That I think is going to be memed the most because Marvel movies are a treasure trove of these.
I think it's going to be that one, but it's going to be twofold. It's going to be what's better than magic? Blank, and it's also perhaps only going to be me making this meme, but there's also going to be, what's better than blank? Math! That's another meme that's going to be spread purely by my hands.
I guess it could work both ways.
Yeah,
I can see that.
So a scene we kind of touched briefly on that I think we can go back to is all of the villains being brought to Happy's house and all the dialogue and fun stuff happening during that.
Oh yeah, of course. That one was another great scene for Spider-Man not just being a great combatant, but just being a technical wunderkind, as some people would call him, and I never will again because that felt weird and wrong. But like his ability to use the Fabricator, not only using this advanced technology to create something that's whatever, in theory, I don't know how it works. Maybe it's super easy that even a fucking kid could make a fully functioning car using it. But the fact that he could so easily register exactly what was wrong with their bodies and in his own head devise a way to resolve it. Like the obvious example being the first one with Alfred Molina's Otto Octavius, and how he realized that exactly what went wrong was the chip that was supposed to keep the arms from overpowering his brain fried, and so now the arms are in control of him rather than him being in control of the arms. So for Spider-Man to so quickly register that and then to work up a replacement chip, like, great example of Spider-Man being a fucking genius.
In fact, I think this might be the first time in the 3 movies that we actually got him, like, we know that he made, like, his own Spider-Man tech at the beginning, like the web shooters and all that, but we never actually seen him, like, how smart he is up to this point.
Yeah.
I
So
think
in the first movie, in Civil War. In Civil War, you get introduced to him, and he talks about how he made his own web fluid. He made all this stuff. He made all of his kit. And then in the second Spider-Man movie, you see him. He uses the fabricator on the airplane to make himself a suit that could better deal with the Mysterio bots.
Yeah. My main thing was with that scene, it's more of he's working on what he already has, but this one's actually him, like, applying his, like, knowledge of, like, science and physics and all that stuff to, like, be able to come up with, like, they make an anti-serum for the Goblin, even though it doesn't work. But the fact that he was able to get a basis for that, as well as he was able to figure out what the problem with the eliminator chip is, and was able to come up with the idea of building one, right?
So I think one of the key details that people might miss in that scene is not only does he realize the limiter chip's the problem and create a replacement, it's not just him taking the original design and recreating it and plugging that into Otto Octavius's spine, I guess.
Yeah.
One of the key details that a lot of people might fucking miss is that chip continues fucking working, and Alfred Molina's Otto Octavius is completely in control, even after he gets shocked by Electro with the power of an arc reactor. So Peter not only saw, oh, that's the problem, it got fried, I'll replace the chip, he obviously put in some sort of backup to keep it from getting fried the moment it got a bit of juice in the future again. Because that's what happened the first fucking time around, was Otto Octavius got too much power into him vis-a-vis the power of the sun in his hand, and that fried the chip. This time getting shocked at having all that electricity coursing through his body did not fry the chip the second time around. So not only did Peter fix it, he also worked in a backup to make sure that exact problem never fucking happened again.
Yeah.
And, like, they don't call attention to it, they don't say that that's what he's doing, but clearly he did it because what should have caused the problem to happen again didn't cause it to fucking happen again.
Or he built the thing for Electro to pull out all the excess electricity from him.
Yeah, and he even, like, goes on to explain, like, it's obviously not going to pull all the electricity out of your brain, or out of your body, because you know you need electricity for your brain. Why am I explaining how the human body works in electricity to a guy who's made out of electricity? Like, he understands that it needs to pull out the electricity that gives him the powers without pulling all the electricity out of his body. Fucking brilliant.
Now, they could have easily put in a single sentence to explain that, like, oh, hey, like, the chip wasn't fried because you made it stronger. Like, yes, it was unnecessary, but they could have. And I think it would have been more prudent to have just a single line get said during when the Goblin serum doesn't work. Because it did seem weird, and it makes sense, but it did seem really weird how he gets stabbed with the anti-Goblin serum, and then just shrugs off like nothing happened. And it's like, clearly I was like I was manipulating the serum to not take away my goblinness. But it's a line he could have said in like just a few words, and it would have worked well with what was happening.
That is 100% just what I assumed was happening when, because Peter obviously didn't understand the specifics of the serum in the first place, so how could he create an anti-serum? So I assume he was working with Norman, and Norman was giving him the details of the serum. So my assumption when it didn't work was just that the Goblin was manipulating things behind the scenes to make sure the serum didn't work. But yes, it wouldn't have hurt to include that line just so we have the understanding of why it didn't work, and it does work when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man makes the serum.
Yeah, Tobey Maguire, I mean, he would know more about it, but like,
well, he even has the line about. Well, not necessarily, because he even explains that ever since what happened with Harry as well, he's like his biggest regret. And I think he probably got the information about how the serum worked after the Spider-Man 3 movie. Is kind of how I took it.
Yeah, because how he was. Yes, he did have that one line about trying to fix them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
So-
Andrew Garfield was the one who came up with he fixed the lizard equation, so him being able to reverse it makes sense too.
Yeah,
'cause,
he
I already cured him. So
yeah, he cured him in the first movie, so it makes sense that he already knows how to cure him in this movie. Speaking of, so we kind of talked about, well, I guess I kind of talked about the chip, and that was like a great example of show don't tell in movie telling. Like they weren't
Yeah.
going through the details of explaining exactly what happened. They just had it happen, didn't draw a huge amount of attention to it, and it's one of those details you can pick up on. Another one of those details that they call no attention to, but does a lot of storytelling if you look out for it, is the fact that MJ is wearing the broken Black Dahlia necklace throughout the entire movie. Like, yeah, it's one of those details where if you haven't watched the previous movies, it's just a nice necklace. If you have watched them, you realize it's the gift that he gave to her. So her wearing it throughout the movie just seems like her still being in a relationship with him, sure. But the fact that she continues to wear it after she has forgotten everything about Peter Parker is a very nice detail, and I think it leaves some room for, even if she doesn't know who she is, there's something in the back of her brain somewhere that allows her to make that connection if he ever does decide to tell her.
Yeah.
now, I feel we're not ready to talk about the ending yet.
We're
So,
not.
yeah,
I needed to talk about that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so let's put a pin on that for now. But yes, that's a great observation. I did not notice that. But there's a lot to be said about the end.
Yeah. Actually,
So-
another interesting thing to talk about during the Statue of Liberty fight is, did you guys notice any of the figures that were coming through in the tears?
So I
was hard
noticed
to see.
Scorpion and Rhino. I don't remember any others that stood
There
out
was
to me.
also Craven the Hunter and at least one or two Dr. Ox.
Oh, you're right. There was Craven the Hunter. I remember
It was
now.
now we didn't really get a good sense of them. That's clearly what they were,
Yeah.
but it was hard to like the shape could have been literally anything.
Yeah, I think they were
Like,
just
when I
kind of
saw
alluding to the
Scorpion
fact
there,
there's multiples.
Yeah, like when I saw like the Scorpion, it almost looked like just an alien with a really long neck.
I think it's one of those ones where if you were watching this at home and had the opportunity to pause when it panned over that, you would be able to see them all in enough detail that you could probably figure out who each one was supposed to be.
Oh, definitely.
But in a movie where you can't pause it and you're watching it in theaters, there probably is a lot more room for interpretation.
But yeah, I think for the most part, I didn't catch anything that didn't look like it was a Spider-Man related villain or character. So I think it was just alluding to the fact that the spell was bringing through Spider-Man villains, and if they didn't cast the Everyone Forgets Peter Parker spell at the end, it would have been like fucking every single Spider-Man villain brought into the universe. In every version of them.
You know, an infinite amount of Spider-Man villains, but also an infinite amount of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's specifically everyone who knows that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same person, so we probably would have also gotten multiple Gwen Stacy's and Mary Janes.
So yeah, on that, technically there would have been Aunt May's and Gwen Stacy's and Uncle Ben's.
Yeah, the odd Uncle
I
Ben.
There would have been very few Uncle Bens, because most Uncle Bens die before figuring anything about Peter Parker being Spider-Man. Most of them die
wouldn't
before
have
Peter
known,
Parker
yeah.
becomes Spider-Man.
That's right. Yeah, they wouldn't have known. Yeah, a few Aunt May's. However, the Mary Janes and or Gwen Stacy's should have been in there somewhere, and maybe they were, but they just weren't. You know, like obviously they weren't going to get summoned when Neil does his his portal summon.
Yeah, I think it was ultimately because it's explained that because at the beginning when the spell starts to bring through everything, since Strange locks it down, I think the characters we see are just the few characters that actually managed to get through. There could be more out there that just were never contacted, obviously, as alluded to by Venom.
Yeah.
Because the only reason they needed to capture them was just so that they would stop, blowing up highways and whatever.
Yeah.
So,
it just
yeah,
happened to
there
match
could
up with
be-
the fact that Doctor Strange finished the retrieval spell to send them all back.
yeah. So there could have been another 40 some people that came through, but yeah, they weren't important.
That seems harsh. They're probably important to their families. They're just not relevant to the story.
Yeah. How did you guys feel about him making the decision to forget Peter Parker? I thought it was going to be everyone forgets Spider-Man was going to be the thing at the end, not Peter Parker.
Yeah,
Well,
it was tricky. Well, tricky is a weird word. I feel like that was a very difficult choice for him to make, and I think it was purely because they were all coming for Peter Parker. So if everyone forgot who Spider-Man is, you would still potentially have villains who have an uneasy sense that they need to kill Peter Parker without understanding why they need to kill Peter Parker. It probably would have worked. I saw people online suggesting that instead of having them forget who Peter Parker was, they should have forgotten what Mysterio said about Peter Parker. But I don't think that would have worked.
Not for
just
the other
because-
dimension stuff, but the first spell should have been everyone forgets what Mysterio said.
Well, even
Yes.
then, I don't think it would have worked for that one because the way that worked is Mysterio came out and said Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and even if everyone forgets that, the conversations everyone had with all their friends and family after that would have been, hey, by the way, isn't it crazy how Peter Parker is Spider-Man? So even if you forget what gave you the idea in the first place, you've had enough conversations since then where that information was reconfirmed for you that it would have been a problem. So,
I mean, I feel like we're kind of slowly getting into this now, but that's the same problem happens with the spell anyways, if that's the problem with that version of it. Everyone forgets Peter Parker. Well, it's like, man, isn't it strange that Spider-Man is Peter Parker? Because there was obviously conversations afterwards.
yeah, but the whole point is if you're forgetting who Peter Parker is, then it's just, isn't it crazy that Spider-Man is someone I can't remember who he is? And then that's the conversation that you remember. Whereas if you're just remembering, is unless every conversation you had about Peter Parker was, isn't it crazy how Mysterio revealed who Peter Parker was? Then I feel like that memory gets erased. But if your memory is just, if anyone has a conversation of, did you hear in the news Peter Parker is Spider-Man? I feel like that memory would slip through even if you erase the Mysterio memory. But the idea of forgetting who Peter Parker is as a whole, or forgetting the detail that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, it catches a lot more in its net.
yeah, and mostly because of what the first spell was, it makes sense that like needing to recast the spell proper would be how it resolves it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Uh,
but yeah, like there could have been 100 ways that he could argue. Well, what if he just called the admissions office instead of casting the spell? Well, obviously that would be the better way to resolve the whole conflict of the movie.
I feel like we're getting close to getting to the big topic, which I feel is going to take the longest, which is the spell. So
No,
before that,
no.
there's something I want to talk about, and that was, what is your favorite Spider-Man in this movie?
You mean of the three?
Yeah. Because I'm going to be honest, I think Andrew Garfield stole the whole show.
I think
I think they gave. All right, so I was feeling this. I think that they did a lot of fan service on his behalf. He had a lot of lines directed to him about how, like Tobey Maguire saying, like, no, you're amazing. Say it. You are amazing. And yeah, he got his redemption with saving. They also
Yeah,
had. Sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, when he saves MJ, I think that
Yeah.
was probably my favorite scene, and like I actually got goosebumps from it. It's like, whoa, that was like really good payoff to the character's arc.
Mm-hmm.
see.
But but yeah, I think that they gave a lot of focus on him, sort of like fluffing him up, whereas the others didn't. Like Tobey Maguire didn't really like.
Didn't require a fluffer. Is that what you're trying to say?
There was no really fluffing of him and his character. He got to talk about how he fought some black alien thing, which is like, okay, cool. But then, obviously we know Tom Holland's like, oh yeah, I fought an alien in space, and then
I think the
what
reason
we
we get
from.
so I think
Sorry,
the
just-
reason we get a lot of that from sorry, go ahead, finish your point.
Yeah, so the other bits that we do get about Tobey Maguire specifically are about how, yeah, he has a bad back and needs help cracking it, and then, well, and he has like the web shooters, which like he can't really explain, but isn't that just kind of weird? He didn't need to be super smart like the others. And then he has the line about where like they take a shot at him about like, are you going into battle dressed as a middle-aged youth pastor? And that was really like the only bits for Tobey Maguire's character.
So I think the reason that uh, Andrew Garfield got so much of a fluffing, as we're now referring to it, I guess, is because of the fact that his movies were widely panned by the audiences and by the
Yes.
internet. They were considered the weakest of the three sets of Spider-Mans. So a lot of the punching up that they did with that was to kind of defend those movies in a sense and defend some of the choices that made. So the fact that he didn't fight any aliens and having Tobey Maguire tell him you're still amazing, like yeah, that's him being nice. That's also them making direct reference to those movies were called The Amazing Spider-Man and not just Spider-Man. Um, it, I feel like the reason he got so much
that's definitely why they did it.
the reason he got so much time in the sun and the reason why they did such a strong effort in making him seem positive was because of the fact that he was largely panned. So while I did enjoy him, I enjoyed a lot of the payoff we got for his character. I still feel like Tom Holland was my favorite Spider-Man in this movie just because of the growth that I saw him go through over the course of the movie.
It's
the
his
other two,
movie, so
the other two were Spider-Man in their own rights. Tobey Maguire doesn't really get an arc at all.
No.
He's the most experienced one, so he's already there to kind of act as like a guiding role to the other two.
Oh, for a second there, I thought he pulled a Harrison Ford. It's like, yeah, I'll come back, but you gotta kill me off.
Andrew Garfield had his own kind of redemption in the fact that he got to save MJ when he couldn't save Gwen. And he got to talk about how he wasn't the greatest and have the other one stand up for him and be like, no, you're still awesome, even if you haven't fought aliens. Whereas Tom Holland, like, yes, it's his movie. He got a lot more screen time, but just the growth his character went through over the course of it and the shit he had to go through does make him still my favorite Spider-Man in the movie.
That's fair. I was pleasantly surprised with how excited I was to see Andrew Garfield in the role again compared to the other ones. Like, I was actually, him being in the movie, I was more excited for than Tom Holland being in the movie, which is the weird part. But there was a few things that came of it too. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but for a couple days after the movie premiered, Amazing Spider-Man 3 was trending. And there's been a lot of people wanting Andrew Garfield to return to the role in some capacity, or even cross over into the Venom universe.
I would actually be into any of that. I honestly was a fan of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. I realized they had their flaws. The one thing I always felt about Andrew Garfield was he made a very strong Spider-Man, and his Peter Parker was a little bit lacking in my mind because he played the role of self-assured Spider-Man who's talking down criminals a lot better than he played kind of awkward, nerdy Peter Parker. But I was a fan of the movies, and I would be fine with seeing more Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man in a separate portion of the multiverse.
Yeah, and Andrew Garfield, like, even if he wasn't the best Peter Parker, I feel like he's always been the most enthusiastic to play Peter Parker and Spider-Man because he's like a really big fan himself. And like watching his interviews back when Amazing Spider-Man was a thing, or even leading up to this, you could tell he really much like he loves the character and the franchise. And I think if he had the choice, he'd be fine playing only Peter Parker Spider-Man for the rest of his life if he could.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's that enthusiasm that even when Amazing Spider-Man wasn't the best movie, he was always like so good at it. And to see him be able to like elaborate on that further within like this universe and franchise, I think it would be like nothing but a benefit to it.
And that is one of the things I loved, is even though his movies weren't widely loved, because, I mean, yes, they had their flaws, the fact that when he came on stage, or on screen in the theater, and the theater I was in, they kind of went fucking nuts. They also went nuts when Tobey Maguire came on. But, like, that was the first collective moment of emotion shared by the fucking audience. It just goes to show that there is support for him out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like him going to Comic-Con dressed as Spider-Man, like there was definitely like yes, he is because of his love for the character that may have also been the reason why they gave so much fluff to him. You know, like when Tobey Maguire, like when the OG Spider-Man is looking at you on screen and saying like, "You are amazing." Say it. You are amazing. And he's like, I don't know, man. Like I'm not that great. It's like, no, you are. So
Thanks.
I
I
gave it
just needed
more.
to hear that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
more so like for Andrew Garfield probably. But,
It wasn't even scripted. It was just Tobey Maguire trying to motivate him.
yeah,
Yeah, it was actually probably just like them happened to be rolling while they weren't actually shooting, and it was just Andrew Garfield being like, "Man, you guys made it to 3 movies. I only made it to 2. My movies weren't that great. I don't know. I just feel kind of bad. You guys are so amazing." And Toby just turns to us like, "No, you cut that shit out. You are amazing." And the director's like, roll. Film all this. We'll add it in post. We'll fix it. And yeah, I assume that's what happened.
so yeah, we should talk about an end credit scene before we get to talk about the ending.
Yeah. So we
So-
have the 2 end credit scenes.
Yeah, well, one is just a trailer,
Yeah.
which
So
Yeah.
the end credit scene, I thought was a really nice touch because the end credit scene from Venom Carnage, There Will Be Carnage, was them writing Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and Venom into the MCU and be like, look, he's here. He can see Peter Parker on the news and all that jazz. And so I really enjoyed how the end credit scene for No Way Home was them writing Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock out of the movie
Yeah.
or out of the MCU altogether, but leaving a little bit of Venom goop behind for them to introduce that character into the MCU if they want to.
I made the joke coming out of the theater that what they should do is for the next 3 college Spider-Man movies, just every post-credit scene has the Goop getting closer to New York. No, nothing else.
The post-credit scene is just always goop rolling down the street.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that one, it's just crossed the Mexican border into Texas. And the next one, it's like, oh, it's at New Jersey. Next movie, it's going to get here.
slightly bigger each time. You know, like it's inhabiting a fish, that's inhabiting a dog, that's inhabiting a person.
It's never actually inhabiting anyone. Each scene involves someone like reaching out, like, what is that? They're about to touch it, and then someone calls a name and they pull their hand back and walk away from the goop, and it's constantly teasing who's going to be the first Venom, only for them to pull their hand back and walk away each time.
And then, you know how they do with the MCU movies, how it's like so-and-so will return next movie. It's just everyone, it's like, the Venom symbiote will return next movie.
Yeah. And it doesn't mention any other character, just like the symbiote will return.
It's coming still.
It's like, didn't even make an appearance.
Except for the end credit scene.
All right, so the end credit trailer. I actually am glad they did this. I feel, well, glad's a strong term, but I feel like with the 2 end credit scenes in movies lately, it's always been one has been related to the plot and one has just been like a fun scene of Jeff Goldblum riffing for 30 seconds to go all the way back to Thor Ragnarok. So I feel like oftentimes the 2 end credit scenes, one always feels like just kind of meaningless and doesn't always serve a purpose. And I was a big fan of when the end credit scene was just a trailer for the first Avengers movie. So the idea of them going back to just having one proper end credit scenes that you're sticking in your seats to see, and maybe the second one is a trailer for an upcoming movie that's somehow related to the plot of this one, I think would be a very positive change for everyone involved.
Well, some of them aren't just like nonsense scenes. Like, for example, Shang-Chi, the final scene of that one was us getting the hint about the beacon.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're all nonsense scenes. I'm just saying oftentimes when you have multiple post-credit scenes, they don't always both drive the plot forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the trailers. I don't know. I don't know which I like more, be it the trailer or like the scene cut straight out of the next movie. Like when
Yeah, I would have been
So-
fine if it was like, for example, where he goes and he meets Wanda in that orchard thing. If it was just that scene, I think I would have been
Yes.
fine with it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that too. If it was the scene from the beginning of the trailer where Wanda's like, "Oh, I knew you'd be coming eventually. Look, I made some mistakes." And it's just him like, "I'm not here about what happened in Westview. This is multiverse things." If it was
Because-
that scene, perhaps with some more shots, I'd be fine with it.
because for a trailer, you know you're gonna get the trailer on the internet. Like already the trailer is on YouTube now for Multiverse of Madness, so you can see what the end credit scene was. But something you wouldn't get just on YouTube the next day later, unless it's a cam rip. Don't get me started on that nonsense. But a scene straight out of the next movie feels like a cool little like hint or an Easter egg. You know, like, oh man, that's so cool. Like,
Well, that argument right there is why I prefer trailers to second scenes, because I hate what Marvel has done in the fact that anyone who wants to see a movie ever, even if it's not a Marvel movie, let's say you want to see Ghostbusters, you have to sit through the entirety of the credits in case they put more content at the end of the trailers, or not the trailers, at the end of the credits. So when it's a trailer as one of the post credit scenes, then you don't have to sit through. You sit through the like animated fun credits where it's showing names and artful pictures from the movie, and then they have a scene that I'm perfectly fine with. But if they make it so that the second one is just a trailer for another movie, then you don't have to feel pressured to sit in the theater for the extra 5 minutes or whatever watching all the credits go by, because you know that that trailer is just going to be on the internet later that fucking day if you're seeing it the first fucking night of release.
I'll be
So-
honest, I don't personally mind the waiting, but I know I'm an outlier.
yeah, like I know, especially after a longer movie, like after a 3-hour movie, you know, people don't want to sit around and watch the credits. However, I like having to put in the effort, you know, putting in the work to get this like secret little thing. So
I was fine with it when it was just Marvel, but the fact that now anytime I see any movie and the trailers start, or fucking stop saying trailers, the credits start playing, I have to pull up my phone and Google, I don't know, fucking Porky the Pig movie 2 post credit scene to see if I'm allowed to leave or not yet. Always frustrates me, because if I don't Google it and I decide to stay just in case and it just gets to credits roll and then black screen, I always feel disappointed. So all I'm saying is I don't mind it with Marvel, and I didn't mind it at first, but the fact that it's now spread to every movie ever now has to have a mid-credit scene and a post-credit scene, I just find frustrating. And
well,
I
it
would
is Marvel's
prefer it-
fault. Like not everyone needs to freaking mimic Marvel. Everyone wants to be the next like MCU success, but
Yeah, I just tend
yeah.
to Google, if I'm going to a movie, I Google end credit scene or mid credit scene, and then I find out that way. If it's a Marvel movie, I'll just stay anyways.
all I'm saying is I wish I didn't have to Google whether or not there's an end credit scene for a movie.
That's
I
fair.
wish it was if it was common practice for them to be trailers, so I knew I could just Google it after the movie, or if it was common practice for it to constantly be scenes, that'd be fine with me too. But where everyone wants to be the next Marvel and everyone's doing post-credit scenes, like the fact that Ghostbusters has had 2 post-credit scenes infuriates me to this day, because I did not stick around to watch them. I saw this is a Ghostbusters movie. Why would a Ghostbusters movie that clearly has no plans on making a direct sequel to this movie, why would it ever have post-credit scenes? I got up and left, and the fact that I missed out on 2 full scenes that I'll not get to see until it comes out for fucking home release and I watch it again then for the second and a half time, I find very frustrating.
You take that
So-
back. Us Ghostbuster fans need all the content we can get.
I just
Alright.
wish this isn't what the norm for movies was right now. I understand Marvel did it, and Marvel only ever did it initially as a way of marketing upcoming movies. The post-credit scenes from the original Iron Man were just references to the Avengers are a thing that's coming down the pipe eventually. It wasn't added content for the movie itself, it's marketing for future movies that they're doing. And the scenes can be fun, and I will stick around and watch them. I would prefer it if that shit was just trailers that I could watch online after the movie, rather than having to sit around through the credits in the hopes that there is a scene. Because every once in a while, a studio goes out on a limb and says, I'm not going to be the next Marvel, and doesn't make a post-credit scene, and then I'm just sitting in a theater holding my dick for no reason.
Now, I understand your frustration with this. I sympathize. However, let's all take a moment to realize that this is the single
So it's
lamest
the most
first world
problem I could ever have.
of all time. Like, oh my god, I have to Google the ending to a movie before I go see it in IMAX on opening night. Like, what a shame. Like,
Oh, I
really, though.
completely agree. It's a first world problem. I'm just saying, just because it's a first world problem doesn't mean it's not a problem. I'm allowed to vent about one thing I wish was different about the world. And if you try and take that away, then congratulations, this was your last time ever on this podcast. I hope you
It's okay. He just gets angry at anyone that sits in that chair.
Yes. Yes. I notice there's a lot of tears on the floor, where I'm sitting right now.
Oh, that was from the one time I accidentally sat there.
Yeah.
Matt has built up a tough exterior and is used to it. The one time Keith sat there and I just let it all out on Keith, it was not pretty.
Well, I think it's time to get into the big discussion, if you will.
Yeah.
The spell.
Is there anything else we need to talk about with this movie? I think we're ready to talk about the ending.
Yeah, I want to talk about the spell. There's
I
two ways it works, and neither makes sense.
Oh, wait,
Right.
for the technicality of it?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. That's not what I'm prepared to talk about.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
there's two realms of thought for this spell. So everyone forgets Peter Parker. So Doctor Strange said it does not change anything timeline-wise. So it doesn't rewrite time, it rewrites everyone's memories. Does that mean the physical evidence is still out there that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and that Peter Parker exists, or were all physical documents removed at the time the spell was cast?
So either way, I don't think it matters like how it works, because however the spell works, it's going to be that they can't comprehend it, or they can't know. Like,
See, I understand.
Photos.
I understand what you're getting at here, Keith, because there's the 2 points. If it doesn't erase the documents, then everyone's just going to read Flash Thompson's book.
Yeah, Flash Thompson's
realize
book,
Peter
it was the
Parker-
big one that got me on this. Like, his book is literally about Peter Parker being Spider-Man, or all of MJ and Ned's text messages with Peter, for example, right? But she still has the necklace.
And if it does erase all that documentation, how the fuck's he renting an apartment? Because he shouldn't have fucking social security numbers.
Yeah, birth certificate,
or
everything
anything.
should be gone. He doesn't exist anymore if it's the other way.
So what I assume happened, and I think it's what Thomas was getting at, is that all that documentation still does exist, but it's kind of like you have a memory block in place. Like if you couldn't remember an actor's name and you just started listing movies he was in and still couldn't remember the actor's name, just because you bring up details around it, because based on what I remember of the title of the book, it wasn't so much about Peter Parker. It was more so just about Flash being best friends with Spider-Man. So it's possible just that I don't know for sure how it works. I don't know magic, obviously.
Yeah.
So are you
no one knows magic who's watching the movie. So it's just supposed to be a magical kind of experience where, it worked out somehow because they did the MacGuffin.
I mean, they did this with Sentry in the comics, but that one was more of when people remember. They remember they're not allowed to remember, and then they stop remembering.
Yeah, and that's kind of my interpretation of events. It's something to that effect of anytime someone, like when Peter filed his paperwork to get an apartment and they checked security or social security number, like, oh, yep, looking it up, that is in fact you. You are Peter Parker, you get to live here. And then the moment they fucking sign over the apartment, they're like, who did I rent that apartment to? Like, I assume it's the kind
I
of
hope he
thing
pays
where,
the rent on the first.
I assume it's the kind of thing where the information's allowed to exist in their brain, but they just can't keep it as a memory, to the point where anytime someone has an interaction involving Peter Parker or looking up details from Peter Parker from the past, they just immediately forget it. I don't know if that means if he took off his mask in the middle of Times Square and was like, I'm Peter Parker, if everyone would immediately forget who he is in that moment.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, moving forward, if the spell keeps, then that means he physically can't have a relationship with any living thing. But at the same time, like,
yeah, it's just everyone forgot who Peter Parker was, so they can learn about it now.
Yeah. But like, for example, like what happens if Peter?
Makes sense when he's just like in the coffee shop. The fact that he gave her his name and then she remembered it.
Yeah.
So
It's just like, what if Peter goes to, like, say he did go and say, hey, we were in a relationship, I'm Peter Parker, Spider-Man, here's tech messages proving our relationship before the memory wipe happened because of the wizard that everyone's aware of. And would she like be like, I forgot everything that just got said, or is that like new information at that point?
See, that's the tricky part. So what I assume is they can't figure it out based on previous information. So if someone read Flash's book, they wouldn't be able to figure out that he's Peter Parker. But if he came up to them and was like, "Hey, I'm Peter Parker. I'm Spider-Man," they would be able to figure out Peter Parker is Spider-Man based on information that came out after the spell. I don't know the specifics of how the spell worked, but maybe they wouldn't be able to remember their time with him from the past, no matter how much explaining he did, but they might be able to believe him and move forward from that. I don't fucking know.
That's right.
Magic's weird.
Oh,
but
I have.
they'll probably explain it when it needs to be explained.
Yeah,
They
because
probably won't explain it and hope that no one asks any fucking questions.
like the Scovia Accords.
Yeah.
I do have one extra layer of absurdity to this, though, and that's, did the spell affect only Tom Holland Peter Parker, or did it hit all Peter Parkers?
See, it has to have hit all Peter Parkers.
Because the people coming from the other dimension.
Yeah, they're still looking for him because he's Peter Parker. So the one thing I could think of is maybe it didn't hit all Peter Parkers because the nature of it was they wanted everyone to forget who he specifically was. Now, the way he phrased it, he wanted everyone to forget who Peter Parker was. So maybe they also forget other Peter Parkers, and he just fucked over all Peter Parkers who were happily married and still had a relationship with Aunt May for them to walk in the door one day and their wife to pull out a fucking gun and be like, "Who the fuck are you? Get away from me."
Yeah, because there's two levels to this. It's either it only affected Tom Holland, in which case, technically, MJ and Ned should remember the two other Peter Parkers that are Spider-Man that they met, or every Peter Parker that goes back to their universe, now no one remembers them.
I kind of think it has to be every Peter Parker because otherwise I feel like MJ would have had a much bigger reaction to Peter Parker walking in and being like, "Hi, I'm Peter Parker." You feel like she would have had the
Oh, a
reaction of,
third
"Oh,
one.
that's weird. I recently met two Peter Parkers and they were both Spider-Men. Are you also a Spider-Man?" I feel like that's a conversation that might have fucking happened. So it might very well be that every Peter Parker in the multiverse from that point onwards had a very awkward conversation with all of their loved ones the next fucking day.
Isn't
Yeah,
magic
they
fun when you think
probably
about
won't
it?
explain it. You're right.
Oh, 100%. I don't think they're ever going to explain it. It'd be nice, but I don't think they're just
It's
going
just
to like,
gonna
it
be-
happened.
It's just gonna be one of those things that it happened. It worked out. They all lived happily ever after, except for Tom Holland.
Yeah, they didn't live happily ever after. Let's be honest for a second. There's some sadness going on there. So let's get into the meat and bones of the actual ending, I guess.
All right. So, true to how the comics went, Spider-Man needed to do the spell to make everyone forget, and then he makes the promise. He promises his girlfriend and his best friend, "I will come find you." And upon finding them, he hesitates because he saw the injury on MJ's head and was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna put them in danger."
So
After,
there's the two things that cause him to hesitate. The first thing that causes him to hesitate is seeing them both being very happy and excited about the fact that they got into MIT, which means they're both very happy in this current established reality. And the other one is the reminder of the injury she got from being involved with him, which leads him to the conclusion of they're both happier and safer without me being a part of their life. I shouldn't reintroduce all the trauma that I, as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, bring.
Also, brief aside, do you think the missions person's like, I promised I would get MJ, Ned, and Spider-Man into MIT?
Well, I assume it was one of those things where because she made a point of saying, "I'm going to talk to admissions about you and I'm going to talk to admissions about your friends," and maybe the way the timing of the spell came down, she forgot about the fact that she was supposed to have a conversation about him and just had the conversation about, I met this
she would have
kind of man.
forgotten about Peter Parker.
I have no idea what this guy was, but he was really invested in me making sure Ned and MJ got into MIT. So, in light of that man who I don't remember, I'm gonna make sure that Ned and MJ get into MIT. I don't know.
Yeah. So they get in. Maybe Peter had also gotten in, but decided not to. No, I doubt that was the case.
He definitely didn't get in because he was taking his GED
Yeah.
back in his apartment.
Yeah. So, yeah, he got a crappy apartment somewhere in New York and gets to keep being Spider-Man, as we know him. But yeah, now these two characters who are now going to be living in a different city are written out of the story altogether.
Yeah, they did a
and
good bit of writing out here because they wrote
Yep.
those two out of the story by the fact that they're now in Boston instead of New York. They wrote Spider-Man out of the Avengers. No one, well, Spider-Man might technically still be a member, but no one knows how to contact him now except for like putting up the spider signal and hoping he fucking responds to it. And yeah, it was just a lot of. While I don't think this is how it's going to be played, this could very well be used to essentially write Spider-Man out of the MCU, kind of as a whole, because now he's just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and
Yeah.
he deals with crime in New York and doesn't have to appear
Yeah.
in any movie after this one until they have the next Spider-Man movie.
They could just have him show up in like a small cameo on the TV show now, and that would be it. Like, yeah, we don't need to show him in movies or anything like that. That would be stupid of them, but
Yes, he's one of the most popular superheroes in the world. It'd be very stupid of them to use him that way, but that is theoretically what could end up happening.
That's what I suspected.
So yeah, so in line with the comics, he cannot have the relationship with MJ even after they express that they love each other. That was pretty tragic in its own right, that much like, and this is a real homage to the first movie. Much like how in the first movie, Spider-Man had to have that bittersweet ending where he couldn't keep MJ in his life and had to like basically separate it because you can't have your cake and eat it too. We got that same ending this time around, where it's like, nope, I can't have MJ in my life, and I'll keep on doing the Spider-Man thing. But then they have the sequel, which undid that ending. And it's like, yeah, you can have your cake and eat it too. You just gotta work for it. So I'm gonna be pretty disappointed if they just do that with the next movie of them just getting back together, and then it ends with, oh yeah, like just like even in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie, they do that with like he first says no, we can't be together, and then he's like, yeah, we can be together.
I think they already kind of set up Zendaya as MJ as being very smart and figuring things out. So I don't know if them getting together will be necessary thing, but I think at the end of the next movie, if she's in it, we could possibly see her starting to put things together.
I think so. It would be neat if they change it up a little bit and have some like she confronts him about it, but that would be really weird.
See, the thing, so a lot of people on the internet are talking about how this is a very sad ending for Tom Holland in particular. I don't think enough people are realizing this is also a very sad ending for both Ned and MJ as well, because Peter Parker kind of took their choice away from them. Both of them repeatedly told him they're aware of the risks involved with being friends with or in a relationship with Peter Parker, and both of them have repeatedly said they're aware of, acknowledge, and want to continue taking the risks because they like Peter Parker, they like Spider-Man, they approve of what he does and want to support him in every way possible. And Peter Parker heard their input and was like, yes, I understand what you're saying. I promise I will come back. I will find you. I will tell you everything. I will bring you back into the fold. And he sees one moment of them being happy and decides to take that choice away from them and decide they don't get to choose anymore. He's deciding for them that they don't get to be a part of his life, even if they want to, and he wants them to be. He decides it's not safe for them, so he's taking that choice away from them. And a lot of people on the internet are talking about how that's super sad for Tom, or Peter, I guess. But it's also super fucking sad for I keep wanting to call all of them by their actors' names. It's super sad for MJ and Ned as well, because he's taking their choices away from them as well.
Yes, it was very sad, and we can talk in a bit about what we feel this was and if it was a proper ending. But I will say before I forget again. So, and this is a Shaggy's dog story. I had reservations
Scooby-Doo?
about Tom Holland playing Spider-Man because he looks so young, and that it's weird seeing a kid Spider-Man. Part of that is my own hang-ups, because for me, Spider-Man was always my hero. He was, like the hero for me. And it was like growing up, oh yeah, if only I could be like Spider-Man. But now, in the past few years, past 7 years now, it reached a point where Spider-Man is younger than me, and like I'm watching Spider-Man like grow up, which is weird. It's kind of yeah, it's been very weird for me, and so every bit of Spider-Man up through all of his movies and appearances, and even this one in particular, through most of the movie, Spider-Man is a child, like we were talking about earlier. Like he's a kid trying to get into admissions. He's like scared of how the world works and doesn't really understand it all that much, dealing with high school problems. The Spider-Man that we see, or the Peter Parker that we see in the final 5 minutes of the movie, looks like he's aged 10 years. I no longer saw him as a child when he's standing in that coffee shop. Like, I don't know if it was just the acting, or if I just took it all in at once with it. I think it was on Tom Holland for delivering that performance, but that Spider-Man no longer was a child to me. That was a full adult Spider-Man, understanding how the world worked, making a tough, hard choice, and living with the consequences, as he needed to, in line with how the movie was insisting he deal with the world.
Very well said.
So, similar growth for me, and I assume Keith as well, in that every Spider-Man rendition before the Tom Holland one has been a Spider-Man that's been older than me and someone to be looked up to. And this is the first Spider-Man I've experienced who has been younger than me. And I don't just mean the actor, I mean the character of Spider-Man. I am now at a point where I'm older than the character of Spider-Man. And that, oh God, that's a weird sentence to say. 'Cause I don't mean the character himself. I mean the character's age in universe. I am older than that character. And that's a weird experience for me to have. And I'm started seeing him as a kid. Like, in particular, the growth we see from the first one, Homecoming, and he's very much a child in that movie. And one of the scenes that really, like, grips at my heartstrings and reminds me of how young he is in that movie is when he first gets defeated by the Vulture, and he's got the rubble on top of him, and he's looking down at his picture, and he's cheering himself on, going, "Come on, Spider-Man! Come on, Spider-Man!" That fucking scene, and how much of a little kid he looks like in that scene, even though he could probably rip my head off if he wanted to.
Yes.
It's amazing growth between him there and the Spider-Man who's buying a fucking apartment in this one, and who's got a police scanner app on his phone so he can track down crimes. He did a massive amount of growing up, and I don't just mean in the years he's lived. I mean in the emotional maturity he's gained over the course of these three movies, and in particular the last bit of this movie.
Yeah,
is fucking insane.
And really, I feel like most of it comes in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the third movie, where we've seen him in 6 movies. Wait, 6? Yeah, 6 movies, and at the end of in the final 10 minutes of the 6th movie is when you really see him, like, no longer as the same character he was in the previous, like, 5 3/4.
Yeah, he's his own character at that point now.
Yeah. So I think it was done really well. What do you guys think about the decision and really the ending? Do you think this was a good ending for the character?
Oh yeah,
movie?
Yeah, like 100%. This was the Spider-Man ending you should expect. Like, Spider-Man always kind of makes these decisions, so he's kind of been selfish and not really responsible with his things up to this point. And this again, like this trilogy is really the Spider-Man origin as a whole of him becoming the Spider-Man that exists in the comics and stuff like that. So I think this ending is showing us that he's that character now. So I felt like even though it can be seen as a sad ending for the characters, it's the ending you should really expect from a Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm also comfortable saying that I've already kind of shared my thoughts on the ending as a whole, and what I feel about the characters in it. But yes, this ending is the perfect ending to essentially a prequel series of Spider-Man movies. We have now seen all the emotional growth he went through. We've seen his interactions with his different uh, idols. Feels like the wrong word. Role models. Role models. Between it being Tony Stark, he obviously had a bit of a role model in Steve a little bit, to the fact that when he first meets these two Spider-Mans, and I think that's another key detail, is the first time he meets them, he's following their lead so much, and then once they all get together in the middle of the fight and realize it's not working, and he starts to take on a leadership role within those three, I think that's one of the biggest switches that we see in his character,
Yeah.
and we just don't see the payoff until later on, where up until that scene, he's always been looking for someone else to give direction, someone else to give orders for him to follow. And that's the first time we see him actually take on the role of leading for himself and being the driving force between his own behind his own life. So I think that is going to be one of the key details going forward. And to go back to your question, I think this is the perfect example of how to end a prequel series about Spider-Man so that the next time we see Spider-Man in the MCU, he can be very much just the character from the comic books.
Yeah.
And he has all of the traits that we would expect him to have.
Just skip all the or any sort of backstory or explanation as to why he's there. And really, I'm surprised that they really haven't talked anymore about how he got his powers. Like 6 movies, and he never like gives a single hint as to what happened.
Or he just says he got bit by the spider.
Yeah, there's a single line about him getting bit by a spider that he says to Tony Stark, and that's the extent of it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we don't need anymore.
Yeah.
I'm glad that that's what it was kept at.
We can only see Martha Wayne get shot so many times, right?
Yeah. I thought we could only see Uncle Ben get shot so many times, but after this movie, I kind of wish we got to see Uncle Ben shot one more time and Uncle May shot one last time. Or exploded one last time, I guess. Aunt May.
I think you meant to say Aunt Tomei.
You're right, Aunt Tomei is absolutely what I meant to say.
Yeah.
All right, then. Any final thoughts before we start to wrap this episode up?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. I got my little rant out.
Yeah.
All right.
I got to say my piece. I still like great movie, but not the best Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk on the internet about this being the best Spider-Man movie ever, and I think the reason people say that is because it pays off the 5 Spider-Man movies that weren't led by Tom Holland, so it has all of their strengths combined, essentially. I don't think this is the strongest Spider-Man movie.
No,
I honestly don't even think this is the strongest Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. I think it's a very strong movie, but I think I prefer Far From Home over this one.
Yeah, for the rest of the year, the only thing that could possibly unseat Ghostbusters looks like it's going to have to be Matrix, because this one did not unseat Ghostbusters for me.
All right, then.
Sorry. I mirror what you said.
All right, then. Recommendations for something for someone to consume outside of the topic. So, Keith, what's a recommendation?
So I actually wanted to recommend Into the Spider-Verse, another Sony Spider-Man movie, which I feel like does this story better, funny enough.
It does. Spider-Verse is so good.
It is.
It is the best Spider-Man movie.
100%.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does the Spider-Verse a lot better. And the one thing about it is it has to do a Spider-Verse movie and a Spider-Man origin movie at the same time. So I'm looking forward to the follow-up to it, where it gets to do the Spider-Verse movie with a Spider-Man who's already pre-established.
Yeah, Across the Spider-Verse, which got announced.
Yeah, Across the Spider-Verse, that's what it was called. Definitely looking forward to that one. For my recommendation, just so we can give Thomas as much time to think as possible, I am recommending the Hawkeye series. I know we already kind of talked about it a little bit briefly. I don't want to get into spoilers for it. but it's a very solid Marvel series that just finished airing, and I highly recommend anyone seeing it who can get the chance to.
Okay.
There's something.
And for myself, so not a show, surprise, surprise, but for the Marvel fans who are craving more or just want more to experience more of this universe and see where they're getting all the inspiration from and where the series might go next, we have the Marvel Unlimited subscription. So this is for your phone. I've had it for years now. It's fantastic. It's just every week it updates with like, hey, here are the new comics. So I've just read countless comics and series that I didn't think I would love, but there you go. You know, some my absolute favorites now. It's like, well, they have deals on all the time, but I think it was like $70 for the year, and then that gives you unlimited access to every comic ever made. And because Disney owns them, that's also all the Star Wars comics and a whole bunch of other tie-in properties, now including Warhammer 40K. So you can read Warhammer 40K comics now, if you so choose.
Yeah, in the past, I tend to I've used the app as well, and I tend to pick it up if I want to binge through a bunch of stuff. The last time I got it to read through the whole original run of X-Men.
Oh.
Fair enough. All right, what's going on with Instagram, Keith? Anyone correctly guessed this episode or have any answers to previous questions?
Of course. So we'll start off first with our question from the last one, which was, what was your favorite ghost in any Ghostbusters franchise?
Now, any Ghostbusters franchise, so we're including the cartoon, right?
That's correct.
Oh yeah, that's
It could
true.
be
We
from
have someone
anything.
who wasn't a part of that podcast in the moment. So, Thomas, do you also want to answer this question right here and now on the spot?
Well, without getting the full context of it and without seeing the latest Ghostbusters movie, shame, I know. But I will say Slimer, specifically from the cartoon.
Yeah, from animated, yeah. It was definitely better than the Slimer in the movie.
Oh
Yeah, that
the
was,
Slimer in the movie is
on-
just weird.
That was on my list of top 3. So, congrats on something, I guess.
Mine was the ghost driving the taxi cab.
My absolute top one was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Even though I guess he's not technically a ghost, he's within the realm of supernatural being.
So for this one, we did have 2 responses. So the first one we got was from HanaJ_13, who said Mothman. And I think this one technically counts because I do recall the animated one having a Mothman appearance.
Yeah, they fought like everybody, like the Sandman and a whole bunch of like urban legends in that one.
We also had another response from Tachi_Camargo, and hers was the mini marshmallows from the recent movie.
You know what? That's close enough to my answer. I'm giving her full points. I know we don't give out points, but I'm declaring right now Tachi gets full marks for that answer.
And as for if anyone correctly guessed this episode, no one has correctly guessed it as of now.
But if someone does manage to do it before the episode goes live, we will absolutely call you out on our next podcast.
Yeah, it's still live for 20 hours as of this recording.
Question for this podcast, unless you guys have a better one, and feel free to cut me off if you do, I'm going to go with one that we already answered ourselves, but for the audience. Was this the best Spider-Man movie? And if not, what was in your mind?
Quite the flame war coming.
Oh yeah, I want people to fight in the comments.
Yeah, like overall, as I said before, like definitely Into the Spider-Verse is probably like the best Spider-Man movie. If I had to pick a live action one though, I do think Far From Home is probably the best one.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Alrighty then.
Live action. I might go OG Spider-Man 2.
There's a lot of debate for like the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2 being like the greatest comic book movie of all time.
Yeah. As long as you don't go with the original Spider-Man 3, I don't have a problem with you. Alright then. I just want to thank everyone for listening to today's episode. Remember that you can find us on all major podcasting platforms. You can also find our uploads on YouTube. We don't upload any video. We just upload the audio as well as some fun artwork. And make sure you reach out to us on Instagram, as we kind of discussed a little bit earlier. We pose our questions there. We also allow room for people to guess what our topic's going to be about. So make sure you reach out to us there if you want to interact with us. And remember that you can always contact us by emailing us at whatismypodcastabout@gmail.com. That's whatismypodcastabout@gmail.com. All those words are spelt the way they normally are. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you just know what our podcast should be about, reach out to us via email.
So with all of those plugs, is there anything you'd like to plug, Thomas?
Well, 'tis the season. I have nothing going on in my life. However, I'd just like to wish everyone a happy holidays and consider Feed Nova Scotia or your local food bank. So, yeah, consider giving to those who don't have as much in this time of year.
Well, way to make us look like
abnormally-
a piece of shit for not doing something like that.
An abnormally wholesome approach for anyone on our podcast to take, and really makes the three normal hosts look like assholes. Congratulations.
Well,
You're
it has
welcome.
Alright,
it
so,
has been
yeah.
a pleasure having you here, Thomas. Maybe the listeners will hear you again at some point. We'll see if you get through the Peter survival method that happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what that whip's for?
Don't worry about it.
No, the whip's for fun. All right, so with that out of the way, make sure you all tune back in a fortnight for our next episode. Keith, what's that about?
So I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to attract the attention of the big guy, but we're going to learn about someone's life as a weapon.
Can I go now?
Sure.
No, you still have to stay for a 5-minute conversation.